Hi there, my name is Irene, and in this video, we are going to be talking about SketchUp modification commands. Now, these are the commands that can be found on the Tools menu, but these are basically the commands that are going to allow us to alter or change anything that is already existing in our model, so that's why I call them the modification commands. There are a few there that escape that definition, but we're going to pretend them. So, with that being said, let's get to it. Alright, so I am in a new SketchUp file. The template doesn't matter, but just so you know, I am working with meters. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this lady. And once again, every time that I am going to be working with like basic things, like if I'm not working in 3D, I'm going to start by setting up a standard view, in this case, the top view. So I'm going to go here, top view, and there we go. I'm going to pan so I don't have the axes distracting me, and there you go, we have an empty screen. So we're going to start with the modification commands. And again, the principle behind modification commands is that they allow us to change things or the properties of the things that are in our model. And funny enough, the first and most important modification command is selecting, because how we select things will determine what kind of modifications we can do. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to draw a bunch of lines, just a bunch of random lines, and then I want to draw a segment of lines. I'm also going to draw, let's say, a rectangle connecting some of these guys, and then let's say we're going to do a circle here. All right. Okay. So selecting is very important because when it comes to modification commands, if you first activate the modification command and then you select the object, you're only going to be able to modify one object at a time. So what does that mean? Well, let's say, for example, I'm going to use the move command. So the quickie for move, don't worry, we're going to learn all of these commands, but the quickie is M. So if I go straight to the move command and I activate the move command, now I'm stuck in this situation where I can only select one thing to move. So if, for example, I choose this line, that's not a problem. If I choose this line, that's not a problem. But now let's say that I want to select this face here. Jesus Christ, what's going on? This is a real problem. So if you first select your modification command and then you go to select the objects that you want to modify, you're going to be stuck in a situation where you can only select one thing. Instead, what we want to do is we want to select all of the things that are going to be in that modification and then activate the modification. But this requires us to know how to select multiple objects. Because the thing is that by default, SketchUp only allows you to select one thing at a time. As soon as you click on something else, the previous thing becomes unselected. But there are 3 different ways to add or subtract from your SketchUp selection. So let's see what they are. So the first one is one that you should be familiar with if you work with AutoCAD, and that is the selection box. So if I click and drag, I'm going to get a rectangle. Now, same as in AutoCAD, you get 2 kinds of rectangle. You get, if you go from left to right, you get a continuous line rectangle. This continuous line rectangle indicates that for something to become selected, it has to be fully covered by the selection box. And if you go from right to left, you're going to get the dashed line, which means that you only need to partially touch something for it to become selected. Now, the one caveat that I want to bring up about this is the importance of understanding that SketchUp is reading geometry as just lines and faces. So, for example, if I do a selection, let's say like this, you may assume, well, the rectangle is not going to become selected because see how I'm not selecting the bottom of it? And you're right, the rectangle will not be selected, but some of the faces and lines that make it will. Same way, if I come here and I touch on this, you may think, well, all of that line segment that we see there will become selected because I'm touching it. But look at that, there's a little segment that is being left behind. And that little segment may or may not ruin things when you want to go like to whatever modification it is that you want to do. So you have to be very aware of this concept. This is this is raw geometry. Lines and faces are raw geometry. So when we are doing selection boxes, what SketchUp will take into account for fully selected or partially selected is going to be the raw geometry and not the shape that you originally intended, okay? So that's method number 1, selection box. We know it, we love it from AutoCAD. The second method is Control and Shift. So this one, I think AutoCAD also has it, but like I know it the most from Adobe software, so like Photoshop, Illustrator, whatnot. So the idea is that you can hold the Control key, and you're going to see that little plus on the screen to add to the selection. See? So anything that is added cannot be re-added. I did something that I wasn't supposed to. Anything that has been added is not going to, be removed. You can only add if you're holding control. Now, if you hold control and shift, you're going to see that now it's going to switch to a minus. And now that means that you can only remove from the selection. So if something is already not part of the selection, nothing will happen. But if you click on something that was selected, it will become unselected. And then finally, if you hold only shift, you're going to get plus and minus, which means that you can both add and subtract from the selection. I personally hate this one because my brain can never remember who has been added, and I just keep on adding somebody that I shouldn't add, subtracting somebody that I shouldn't have. Also keep in mind with the control and shift method that you don't have to click on things individually. I can make a big selection box. So now I'm mixing selection box and shift control. So see, let's say that I want to have everything selected. Well, I can switch to control and then just add the guys that are missing. So we have selection box, we have shift and control, and then we have one last method that is exclusive to SketchUp, and this is number of click. So basically the way that this works is that when you do additional clicks, that will expand on what is being selected. So a single click will select just one object, or let's say this face. So a single click will just select the face, but 2 clicks, click, click, will select the face and everything that is immediately next to it. Now, the important thing here to keep in mind is that whatever is immediate has to be the opposite. So what does this mean? Well, if I have a face selected, what is immediately next to that face is the boundaries that make that face. But if I click on a line and I double click, it's going to select the faces that are next to that line. The reason that I'm saying that is because if I double click here, click, click, see how it's not adding anything to the selection? Like your instinct might be like, well, it should add this line and this line. But the way that the second click works is it's only adding the opposite. So if you click on a line, it adds faces. If you click on a face, it adds lines. And then finally, we have 3 clicks. So 3 clicks is going to add to your selection anything that is touching. So I go 1, 2, 3. Everyone that is touching gets selected. 1, 2, 3. Everyone that gets touching gets selected. Okay? So mixing and matching those 3 kinds of selection is going to give you a lot of control over what is being added in your model. You also have a relatively new feature, which is the Lasso Select. This is more akin, again, to our known and loved Photoshop. So this guy is going to allow you to basically, you can either create a kind of like polygonal clicking, and when you double click, it's going to close that selection, or you can do a click and drag, and that's going to give you a freehand line. So again, once you want to reach the end, you release, and that's going to add to your selection. So selection is the most important command. The next most important command is the eraser, which is this guy here, and it has the quick key in it. So I'm going to tell you my opinion. I hate the eraser command. It's very weird. So basically, you can click to delete a thing, or you can click and hold to add multiple things to what you are deleting. The problem is that once something has been added to the selection, it cannot be removed from the selection. So it's like I'm clicking and holding and it's just adding things. If I hold Alt, that's not changing anything. If I hold Control, that's Shift, nothing. So it's like once something has been lined up for deletion, you're screwed. As soon as you release your cursor, they're all gone away. If anyone knows how to remove something selected and they want to share it with me, by all means, because I have always hated this command for that one reason. So you might be, okay, so if erase is not the way to get rid of things, what is? Well, delete. You know the delete button on your keyboard? That's what you're going to do. You're going to select all of the things that you want to get rid of, and then you're going to delete them. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy, no need for the eraser. Okay? So those are the most important modification commands. Without selecting and deleting, you're going to have a hard time. Now let's get onto the actual modification commands. So again, going forward with most of these modification commands, what we are going to do is we are going to first select the things that we want to modify, and then we will activate the modification command. Otherwise, again, you're going to be stuck in this situation where you can only modify one thing at a time. So the first command is going to be move. So you're going to select your geometry, and the quick key for move is M. So the way that move works is that it's going to allow you to pick up objects and drop them up in a new location. So click to pick up, click to drop off. Now, interestingly enough, the move command behaves similarly to the line command. Like if you think about it, there is 2 points, a start point and an end point, and you can almost think of your trajectory of the movement as a line. The reason that I'm saying this is because the move command can be done using either direction and value or inference points. So for example, if let's say I just want to move these blocks 5 meters to the right, it doesn't matter where I click because all that matters is the direction and value. So look, I'm clicking all the way on the top right corner of my screen. I'm going to click. As long as I start moving in the direction that I want my box to go, and I type in the value, let's say, let's just move it 3 meters, and I press enter, it will go into that direction. So very important, because especially as your models get bigger and more complex, there's going to be a lot of information. So sometimes it can become very hard to work within, like, your cursor is going to get snapped to a bunch of inference points. So if you know that you're just going to be moving direction and value, you can literally like move your cursor as far away from the model and it's still going to work. The other way is with inference points. So let's say, for example, that I want to move this rectangle so this corner here will touch this corner. So in that case, I am going to use those inference points. And this is super important in SketchUp because remember, as soon as things touch, they fuse. So let's pretend for a second that I'm not going to use the inference points. I'm just going to click somewhere on the face. And then I'm going to come here and be like, yeah, sure. That's right on the corner. Right. Not really. Not even a little, not even at all. So as a designer, you have to work with precision. This is not an option. So you want to make sure that you're using inference points. If I'm using my inference points, see, endpoint click, and then endpoint click. When I zoom in, it is perfectly aligned. So this is one of those things that like gives me cancer. When people like move things just like randomly, drives me insane. The other cool thing is that your inference points can be quite complex. So I'm going to show you something interesting. So let's say that, for example, I want this rectangle to be centered within this other rectangle. So unlike the circle, rectangles don't have a center point, but I also cannot just, let's say, oh, I'm going to move it to this midpoint here, and then let's say I'm just going to drop it, because the problem is that once I put it on this midpoint, it has fused and I'm screwed. So I think you may have already seen it, and I just pretended that it wasn't there, but there's a very handy inference point in SketchUp called the from point. So the way that you activate the from point is by going into any inference point, and you're going to leave your cursor there for a second. You're not going to click on it. You're just going to leave it there for a second. And what's going to happen is that if you move carefully, you can set up a new point that is an inference from another point. So the cool thing about this is that you can have multiple from points. So what I can do is I can find the from point for this mid, then I can find the midpoint, the from point for this other middle. And when I bring it to the center, I get midpoint to midpoint gives me the center of my rectangle. Click to pick it up, and then same thing to drop it off. I'm going to go midpoint, leave it there for a second, slowly move. See, it has locked the from point. Now let's find the other one, midpoint, and voila. I can move center to center. Pretty cool stuff. But wait, there's more. Because now I'm going to introduce you to a very interesting concept of SketchUp that I think I mentioned all the way back on like the introductory video to SketchUp. Just the fact that SketchUp hides other commands within some commands. So let's talk about copy. Copying in SketchUp is pretty straightforward. You're going to select your geometry, you're going to go Ctrl-C, or you can go Edit, Copy, and then you're going to go Ctrl-V, or you can go Edit, Paste, and that is going to allow you to paste your geometry. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V is going to be the only way that you can copy geometry between files. So if you have two SketchUp files open and you want to copy something from one to the other, you can only do it with Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V. But Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V has a couple problems. So the first one is the pickup point. So you may notice, let me do this again. When I select my square, rectangle, and I go Ctrl-C and I go Ctrl-V, by default, so like what I need to do now is click to place my rectangle. But the pickup point of that rectangle is the bottom left corner. Now you might be, that's perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. Now let's see. Let's pretend, for example, that this is not a perfect rectangle. So I'm going to deform this guy a little bit. When I go Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V, it is still the bottom left corner, which right now is not touching anything. So this is a problem because that means that right now I would not be able to place this guy with precision if I want to use inference points. I would have to click on empty space to drop this guy, and then I would have to click on the pickup point that I want to use, and then click on the destination. So there's a bunch of additional clicks that I don't want to have to do. There's an even bigger problem. And that is that when you're using this method, when you click that Control C, your computer has to read all of the geometry that is in that selection, all of the lines, all of the faces, their coordinates, if they have materials, if they have in group component, whatever not. It has to read all of that information. And then when you press Control V, it reads all of that information again. So right now, I literally have 4 lines and a face, so it doesn't really matter. But I'm going to give you a really good real life example. So one time, I was working in an urban development project where we basically had a big plot of land and we had a house, like a model house that then was like repeated. It was like a neighbor, right? A developer neighbor. So basically, I had been working on creating the model house and I had modeled it with so much detail. It was so pretty. I was so proud. And then they were like, well, we want a rendering where we can see all of the houses. And I was like, well, I'm not gonna model this house again. I already have it here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my model house and I'm just gonna copy paste it in the project. So I selected my entire house and I went Control C and my computer froze for like an hour. And that's when it dawned on me that like I may have a problem. And when I really realized that I had issues was when I pressed Control V and then my computer froze again for another hour. So obviously the solution here would have been, number one, I should have made a different version of the house that was like simpler and lighter. But also every time that I would have to do that Control V, I was going to have to wait that period of time because it has to read the whole thing again. The reason that I'm telling you this is because there is a better way to copy within your SketchUp file, and that is using Move. Yes, I know this has been a very long time coming for just this explanation. So when you use the Move command, so again, step 1, you select the geometry. Step 2, M for Move. Step 3, you're going to click to pick up your geometry. What you can do is before you click to drop your geometry, you can press the Control key. And what that is going to do is create a copy. Now, the way this works, if you want to like understand what is the reasoning, is you are still doing the Move command. What you are doing is you're giving SketchUp an instruction to leave a copy behind. And that's why you can see that when I press Control, the copy appears at the beginning. So you're just saying, I want to leave a copy behind. Now, the advantage of this is 2 parts. Number 1, as you can see, I am holding the form by the inference point of my choice. And number 2, when you use this method, SketchUp only has to read the geometry once. And that is when it creates the copy that it leaves behind. Okay? So much easier, much better. You pick up, Control, creates a copy, not Control, goes back to moving. But wait, because it gets even better. Because there's another command hiding within Move, and that is array. In fact, 2 kinds of array, first and second, and first and last. So now let's say that I want to do that copy. So again, select M, pick it up, Control, drop it off. And now let's say that I want to make it several. Let's say that this is like a staircase, right? So instead of me having to pick up this guy again, Control again, place it again, and so on and so forth, as long as I am within the original Move plus Control command, I can add an additional instruction to tell SketchUp, hey, see what I just did? Do it a bunch more times. So the way that we're going to give that instruction to SketchUp is by typing X value. So this is going to give us a first and second array. So a first and second array is one where you know the location of the first object and you know the location of the second object. So you know the distance between elements. So X is going to mean this is a first and second array. And then I can say, for example, 5. And again, remember, press Enter to finish the input. And look at that. Now, the best thing is, again, as long as you don't press Escape or Space, you are still within this Move command. So I could say like, oh, I didn't want it to be 5. I wanted it to be 3. So I can go X, 3, Enter, and it's going to modify. Now, keep in mind, the number that you're typing there is going to be the number of copy. So if you want 10 steps, you're going to subtract the original. So you would type X9. So this is great. Like you can just spend the next hour just adding and subtracting until you find what you like. This is the way that I do stairs, like so easy this way. We have Move plus Control is going to create 1 copy. Move plus Control plus X value is going to make a first and second array. And then the other option is going to be a first and last array. So it's going to start the same. So I'm going to select my geometry, M for move, pick a point, control to make a copy. But this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to place my copy at the end destination. So a first and last array is one where you know the location of the first element and the last element. And what's going to happen is that the number of elements in your array will be spread evenly between that first and last. So let's say that I'm going to put it here, click, and now for a first and last array, instead of X, we're going to use slash. So it's almost like multiplied by divided by. So slash 5, enter. And again, as long as you don't change, like press escape or press space, you can change this. So slash 3, enter, and you can even change the kind of array. So let's say that I figure out, oh, no, I don't want it to be a first and last. I want it to be a first and second. No problemo. I'm going to go X2, enter, and it's going to switch to the first and second. So you have 4 commands for the price of 1. And this is the magic of SketchUp. So if you are like a novice and like you're not going very deep, you might never go beyond the move command. But if you want to be a professional, you get familiar with these extra options. Okay, so that is for the move command. I absolutely love this first and last method. If, for example, you need to arrange sitting along a bar or like a very long table, anytime that you need to evenly space geometry within a specific distance, your first and last array is going to be the solution. So that's for the move command. 1 command, 4 commands. The next one is going to be rotate. Now, rotate it can be easy or it can be complicated depending on what is it that you're trying to do. So let's start easy. You're going to select your geometry. The quick key for rotate is Q. And once again, you're going to see this protractor, which is telling us the fact that we're going to be working with degrees. So when you're working with rotate, you're going to do 3 clicks. The first click is going to be the axis of rotation or the center of your rotation. So let's say I'm going to put it somewhat within the geometry. Click. The second click is going to be kind of like your start point, your pickup point for that rotation. Now, this pickup point is not so much a point as it is a direction. So let's say that I'm going to click here, click, and then your third click is going to be where you actually rotate the geometry. Now, the reason that I'm saying that rotation can be very easy or it can be very hard is because 80% of the times that you rotate things, you're just going to want to rotate them. It's like this, and I want it like this. That's it. So it's going to be 90-degree rotation. So if you think about it, a 90-degree rotation is a direction and value. So in those cases, it doesn't really matter where I click other than the center point. So see, I could have click, as long as I'm clicking on the center point, I can click anywhere, like anywhere. Because what's going to happen is that when I stop moving, that's going to give the direction of the rotation. And then I can say, well, you're just going to rotate 90 degrees, enter. So that's going to be 80% of your rotations. In that case, all you need to pay attention to is the first point. And the first point is very important because that will determine how the rotation is perceived. So for example, if I do what I've been doing so far, which is that I'm putting my center point within somewhat the center of this geometry, you may notice that it looks like my guy is kind of like twirling, right? But if I pick one of these corners as my center of rotation, you're going to see that now it looks more like it's kind of like swinging around that edge. And if I, let's say, put my center of rotation away from the geometry itself, now it looks like it's orbiting around something. So the center of your rotation will determine how the object will move. But other than that, direction and value means that like you don't really have to worry about being very precise or precious with everything else. That does get complicated if you want to rotate very, very precisely. So let's say, for example, that I have this rectangle here, and then I have this line here. So let's pretend for a second that this is a desk. Let me rotate it 90 degrees. See, like doesn't matter as long as I go direction 90, there you go. Okay, so let's pretend that this is a desk and this is a wall. I want this desk to be aligned against this wall. And I do not know the inclination of this wall. So one thing that I can do, I can go to Q, and what I can do is I can use the same inference lines that I was using when I was drawing. I can use them again. Now, the important thing here is that instead of just clicking anywhere for my center and my pickup point, you're going to want to make sure that your center is one of the corners of the geometry and the pickup point is like basically on an edge. So I basically want to trace out one of my edges. Because what I can do now is kind of like, see, touch this line a little bit. So SketchUp understands that I'm working with it. And then I just rotate until it shows me that alignment. And then I click. And what that is going to do is that when I move this object, see, it is perfectly aligned. If I don't use this method, what's going to happen, see, like if I just click anywhere and I click anywhere, I can still use that inference, but now what's going to happen is that the position is not going to be perfectly aligned. So if you want to move with precision, inference points are the way to go, but then you actually have to pay attention to those inference points and inference lines, okay? Now, here's where things get interesting. Rotate has all of the same additional commands that move. So I can copy rotations and I can array rotations. So that would be a polar array. So for example, I can select this guy here, go Q. Let's say that I'm going to select this corner here. Let's say I'm going to select this corner here. And instead of just rotating, if I press the control key, I can make a copy at the same time that I rotate. And if I go, for example, X3, I can make a polar array. If I make /2, that's going to be a first and last. So this is like, I need you to understand. I started working with SketchUp in the year, just like 2008 or 2009, which is like not all the way at the beginning, but it was a long time ago and things were rough by then. I'm going to give you a very good example. So let's say that you have a table, a big table, a round big table, and you need to put as many chairs as you can on that big round table. I'm going to draw a little like line here so we can understand that that is the back of your chair. So what I had to do, what baby me had to do back in the day was select my chair, copy it, place it, copy, place, copy, place, and then I would have to go on and rotate each chair, right? And like, this is not even like properly aligned, properly centered, and this is just 4 chairs. What happens if I want to have more chairs? There is so much room for chairs. Well, what you can do is simply place your first chair, select that first chair, Q for rotation. Now, in this case, the center of my rotation is not going to be the chair, but the table, because I'm placing the chairs around the table. And what I can do now is click in the direction of my chair and then just use control to, make as many copies as I want. Now, I'm going to give you a very interesting trick. So let's say that I don't know how many chairs I want to put on this table. So it's not like I'm just going to put 4 or 6. Like, I want to see how many chairs I can fit before people are too uncomfortable. So what I could do is I can do a first and last array. But here's the thing. Remember, for the first and last array, you're basically setting up where the first guy is and where the last guy is. So the problem is that if, let's say, like I put it here, like maybe that distance that I have between the first and the last is not going to be the same as the other ones. I wanted to do a full 360 degrees. But the thing is that if I bring my last chair here, it's just going to switch back to 0. See, it was counting all the way, and then we're getting almost to 360, and then it's just switching back to 0 when it gets here. So what I can do in this case is I'm going to start my rotation, and then I'm going to go 360. And then enter. Now, it may look like I didn't do anything. What's happening here is that my first chair and my second chair are exactly in the same space. Now, because this is raw geometry, they have merged, and now there's only one chair. If this would be a group or component, which we're going to talk about later, I would have 2 chairs right now. But what I can do now is I have a first and last that are covering the whole 360 degrees of the circle. So now I can go and say /4, and it's going to give me 4 chairs. Or I can go /10. It's going to give me 10 chairs. Oh, I can fit more. Maybe I can do /12. Oh, maybe I can do like one more, 13 for like bad luck. There you go. See? So I really like arrayed rotation is sent by the gods. So with that, we finish the rotation command. Oh, next we have the offset command. So the offset subcommand, you should know it from AutoCAD. It's basically going to allow you to create an offsetted version of whatever geometry. But the interesting thing is the way that SketchUp interprets the offset command. So let's say I'm going to create some geometries here. There we go. So offset, interestingly enough, doesn't work with straight lines. Now, offset doesn't have a quick key, but you're going to find that on the large tool set. It's this guy over here. So offset doesn't work on straight lines because basically offset is saying like, well, if you want to offset that guy, you can just copy it. So offset is only going to work with curved lines and with faces. So with curves, what it's going to do is going to create a copy of that arc that is either bigger or smaller. And once you've started your offset, you can either type direction. You always have to give it a direction, but then you can either click an inference point or you can type in a value. So let's say that I want it to be offsetted by meter. Okay, it's a little bit more interesting because what your offset is going to do is going to be basically pick up on the perimeter of that face. So see, it is highlighting the edge, but it is really recognizing the face. So if I come here and I click, I can make an offset of the perimeter of the boundary of the rectangle, and that can go outwards or it can go inward. Now, the reason that I'm being so insistent on these details is because, for example, if my rectangle has a line cutting through it, when I go to do the offset isn't going to recognize the rectangle. It's going to recognize the boundaries of the face. So here we have two faces, which would mean that I would have two boundaries. Okay, so that's very important to understand. Also, keep in mind that a geometry can have multiple boundaries, internal and external. So if I try to make an offset of the secondary rectangle, see how it doesn't let me? Because there's no face inside that rectangle. I can only offset the outer boundary of a face. So if I would want to be able to offset these smaller rectangle, I need to flood it with a face. Now, this is an interesting trick in SketchUp. If you have an empty space and you want to flood it with a face, you don't need to recreate the entire outline of the object. All you have to do is redraw any of the boundary lines. And for some reason, that triggers SketchUp into thinking like, oh, there's a boundary there. Let me flood it with a face. So I don't need to draw the entire rectangle. All I need to do is redraw one of the lines and bam, now I have a face. So see, now when I go to offset, I can either offset this guy or I can offset this guy. So very, very important to understand. Offset is only going to work with curved lines and with faces. It doesn't recognize lines, straight lines, okay? And with that, I am going to wrap up the commands that basically work only with 2D geometry. Now, obviously, you can use move and rotate with 3D geometry, but it is easier to introduce with 2D geometry. Now we're going to get into 3D geometry, and to do so, we are going to start with push-pull, which is the flagship command of SketchUp. In fact, if you're old enough to remember the original logo of SketchUp, it actually referenced the push-pull command. So the way that the push-pull command works, I'm going to draw a rectangle here, and push-pull basically just allows you to extrude faces. So you need to have a face, otherwise it will not work. But basically what it allows you to do is take that face and extrude it into a 3D object. Now, the quick key for push-pull is P. And basically what's going to happen is that if you change the mouse settings according to what I instructed all the way back in one of my introductory videos, the way that push-pull is going to work is that one click is going to start the push-pull and a second click is going to interrupt it. Or this looks a little bit uncomfortable. Like I'm having a little bit of a hard time understanding like what did I just do? And this is an important thing to understand. As important as it is to set up a standard view when you are drawing 2D objects, it is equally important to orbit around to a 3D view when you're going to be working with 3D objects. In other words, your view should be the optimal view no matter what it is that you're doing. So because now I'm going to be working with 3D objects, I'm going to orbit my view so I can better see the thing that I'm extruding. So see, if I go now back to my push-pull, now I can see what the hell is going on. One thing that I want to mention about push-pull is going to be one of those commands that are the exception to the select then command. And the reason for this is because no matter what, so let's say I have several rectangles here, no matter what you want, if you have multiple geometry selected, when you go to push-pull, it's going to unselect all of it because you can only ever push-pull one geometry at a time. And the reason for this is because your push-pull is going to be aligned to the face. In other words, your extrusion is always perpendicular to the direction of the face. See? So if my face is on the floor, my push-pull is perpendicular to that direction. Okay? So that is very important to understand about push-pull. The other very important thing to understand about push-pull is that push-pull can be a creation command, so that can allow you to create a 3D object out of a 2D shape, but it can also be a modification command. So what do I mean with this? Well, I'm going to draw two rectangles next to each other, and then let's say that I'm going to give a little bit of an offset to the second rectangle here. So I'm going to go back to my P for push-pull, and I'm going to push-pull my first rectangle. Now, this line that you see here is because it's showing you that these two guys are connecting is actually dividing that face in two. See, this is why it's so important to pay attention to who is touching who, how raw geometry interacts. It's still like I've still created a rectangle, right? So look what's going to happen if I do the same thing now. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to draw this other rectangle. And it looks exactly the same. It's just another rectangle, except that if I orbit down,
Oh, no.
it didn't create a 3D rectangle. It just kind of like left a hole. So what's happening here is that if you're using push-pull within a face, SketchUp is going to assume that you just want to modify that object. You're not just creating a brand new 3D geometry. So what can we do here? Well, we're going to use control. Because here's the thing, I'm actually going to draw a different rectangle here. I want to explain to you what push-pull is actually doing behind the curtain. So when you use push-pull, what you're actually doing is you are selecting that face, you're creating a copy of that face that is perpendicular to the original, and then the magic that SketchUp is doing is filling in the distance between that original face and the new face with additional faces. So the reason that I'm going through this long explanation is because same as with regular move and control, if you press control, like you can make it so you just move, or you can move leaving a copy behind. So basically what SketchUp is doing is that if the face is alone, it's moving, leaving a copy. If the face is within other faces, then it just moves the face. So the way that we can fix this is the same way that we would with move command. If you press control, then you tell SketchUp that you want to actually leave a copy behind. If you press control again, then you are modifying the geometry, okay? So very, very important to understand, SketchUp push-pull is not just to create geometry, it can also modify geometry, and it can also even delete geometry. So what does that mean? Well, for example, let's say that I'm going to have another face. So see, like here it was like a face within a face. Let's have here another face within a face. So if I go here push-pull, you should already understand that because this is a face within a face, it's not going to create geometry, it's going to modify my existing geometry. But check this out. If I push-pull this face until it reaches the face on the back, see, and you're going to know that you're in the right place because it's going to tell you on face, or it can also sometimes give you a message that says limit something, something, something. If I go to that face on the back and I click, it's going to make a hole through that geometry because it's basically understanding. It's similar to when we were doing the filleting between two straight lines. When you push-pull a face to another face, SketchUp is understanding that as you want to get rid of both of them and you want to leave a hole in there, okay? As you can see, push-pull is a very complex command. Like it has so many things within it. One more thing to consider, and again, I already mentioned it, but just to highlight, is that your push-pull is going to go in the direction of the face. So for example, if I would want to, let's say, pretend that this is a roof, and I want to have a chimney on this roof, I cannot just use push-pull because that is going to create a chimney. That is not the code. So I would have to use some other tool other than push-pull to create something like a chimney. Okay, so as you can see, push-pull is a creation and a modification command. It has it all, okay? So that's push-pull. The next command that I want to introduce you to is flip. This is a relatively new command, and basically what it's going to allow you to do is flip stuff. So to activate it, you're going to find it on the large tool set. It does not have a quick key, so I'm going to go F for flip. And basically what you're going to see is you're going to get these kind of like plain ghost. And this is going to basically indicate you the different directions that you can flip this geometry. So if I click on the blue one, I can flip it upside down. If I flip on the green, I can flip it back and forth. If I click on red, it's going to flip it left and right. Now, there's a couple interesting things to consider here. Number one, you can select any other faces and make those the flipping axis or angle, so to speak. So for example, I can find this face here and click on it, and now it's going to flip based on that face. I can also click control, and that is going to allow me to copy as I flip. Oops, I was folding it. Control Z. Let me try that again. There you go. See the little plus? That indicates that it's not just going to flip, it's also going to copy at the same time. And I can change the position of these planes. So by default, the planes are going to find kind of like the midpoint on each of those axes. But I can come here and drag this guy. Let's say that I want to bring it to this point here. And now it's going to flip on that plane. So really cool command. I still have a little bit of a hard time getting used to it just because it's pretty new and I am old. But it's a very good tool added to the roster, okay? So now we have follow me. And follow me is where things really go off the charts. So the way that you can think about follow me is push-pull on steroids. So what do I mean with that? Well, push-pull is great and awesome, but it is quite limiting because remember, you can only push-pull perpendicular to the direction of the face. So for example, let's say I have a little rectangle here, right? So let's say that I want to push pull it up, but then what happens if I want to push pull it, I don't know, on red or on green or any other direction? I can't. Like, I would have to do some modifications. I would have to draw new geometry. There's no way to just do it with push pull. But check it out. So the way follow me is going to work is that we are going to need two things. One is going to be the face that we are going to be extruding, which in this case is going to be that little rectangle. And the second thing that you're going to need is a path. So basically in which direction, how far you want this thing to be extruded. And this is where you can have a lot of fun because this path can go in any direction. So say I'm going in 3D, it can go at an angle. You can have curves in it. So let's say that I want to fillet this guy like this. So remember, if you want to fillet, click, and it's going to make it automatic. And yeah, let's say that that's what we want. So I have my face and I have my path. Those are the two key ingredients for the follow me command to function. Now, same as before, you want to select before you activate the follow me command. But what you want to pay attention here is that you're not going to select the whole thing. You have a path and you have a face. You will be selecting the path because you can only follow me one face at a time. So again, remember, it's kind of like push-pull on steroids. So you still can only follow me one face at a time. So because of that, I'm going to start by selecting all of the segments that make my path. And then I'm going to click on the follow me tool, which is this guy over here. There's no quick key for it. So I'm going to click follow me. And I'm going to click on the face that I want to see extruded. And voila, look at this. Isn't that awesome? So this is where things get really interesting. Like follow me gives you a lot of freedoms. So as an interior designer, you can use follow me for any kind of trim. So like trim around doors, baseboards, crown moldings, paneling, any trim is going to be follow me. But you can also use follow me for piping, ductwork, cable work. You can use follow me even for more complex geometry. I'm going to show an example of a bar in a second. So I really, really like follow me. Now, there are a couple of rules and considerations when you're working with follow me. So I'm going to make this. No, actually, let me work with the same one here. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to copy this guy a couple of times. I'm going to select it on for move, click to pick it up, Ctrl to make a copy, and I'm going to make a couple of copies. Let's say 3. I think that should be enough. So there's a couple considerations that you have to take when you are working with follow me. Number one is the importance of picking the path first. So technically speaking, you don't have to pick the path first. You could just go straight into follow me and then click on the face. And what that is going to allow you to do is basically choose the path. So you could start like at a halfway point. Now, the reason that I don't like recommending this is because I don't know if you can see it on my screen, but it keeps on kind of like stopping. And it's not me, it's SketchUp. So especially if you have a very complicated path, this can make things very hard to work with, but it is an option. I'm not going to stop you from doing whatever it is that you want to do. The other thing that is important to consider about your following is how close the path and the face that you will be extruding need to be. So what do I mean with this? Well, let's say that instead of working with this little rectangle here, I'm going to create another rectangle that is going to be a little bit away from the path. I'm going to select my path again. I'm going to go follow me, and then I'm going to click on this face. Ooh, not so good anymore. So basically what's happening here is that SketchUp is guessing what is the path that, this extrusion needs to take to follow the entire pathway that you gave it. So if I am away from that path that I've drawn, you're basically leaving more room for uncertainty. So for example, what's happening here can be shown with the offset. So if I offset this circle here, you can see that the further away I am, the circle basically stops existing and it starts kind of flipping. So that is what's happening to this extrusion here. Because this geometry is being extruded away from my path, SketchUp is having to figure out a new kind of like version of this path that follows this new position. So ideally, you want your face to be touching the path. So that way it's a little bit easier for SketchUp to figure out, which direction it's supposed to go. The other thing that is important to keep in mind is the direction of the face to the path. You may notice that I very intentionally made it so my face was perfectly perpendicular to the beginning of my path. So after the beginning point, like it can go in any direction, it's fine. But in the beginning, you want your path to be perpendicular to the face. So for example, if I take this face here, and let's say I'm going to rotate it, so it's almost aligned with the first line, look what's going to happen now. I'm going to select my path again, and I'm going to go follow me and click here, and oh, that is not the rectangle that I chose. It's kind of like a skinny version of it. And the reason that that's happening is because it's not picking this face, it's picking kind of like the projection of this face along that path. So basically, you are creating uncertainty and SketchUp is taking a guess. And once again, SketchUp is very bad at guessing, okay? So you want to make sure that your face is perfectly perpendicular to the direction of the beginning of the. Otherwise, you might get a deformed version of that face. And this leads me to the final thing that I want to bring up, which is where the face is with respect to the path. You are going to want that face to be at the beginning or at the end of the path. Because if I come here, for example, let's say I'm going to make a rectangle, and I'm going to use my, there you go. I'm going to use my arrow keys to make it so it's like perpendicular. So as you can see, this rectangle is perpendicular to the path line that I picked, but it is somewhere along the path. So the problem with that, see, I'm going to select my path as before, and now I'm going to go here, is that it's going to go crazy. It's actually giving me a warning. It's telling me like, hey, like if this guy is in the middle of progression, like what do you want to do? What's happening here is that normally if you would go like manually, you would only be able to extrude in one or other direction. You cannot go in both directions, okay? So because of this, if you're working with an open boundary, you need to make sure that your face is at the beginning or at the end. The exception to this will be if you're working with a closed boundary. So let's say that, for example, I have this rectangle here, and then I have a profile that I want extruded. It flooded it with a face again. I'm going to deform this guy just a little bit so we can see it better. Actually, let me cut the other corner. I cut this corner here. There you go. So if you are working with a closed boundary, then it doesn't really matter that much. So for example, I'm going to have the face touching the boundary here. So I'm going to select my entire boundary, and then I'm going to go follow me. And it's going to work just fine because it is understanding that it has to close the entire boundary. Or I could also just select the one in the middle, go follow me, and it's going to also work the same. Now, the reason that it left a gap here is because I had that other face. So this other face here is causing some trouble. See, if I get rid of that face, and now I'm going to select my boundaries again, and I go follow me, then it's going to work fine. So my personal recommendation is that if you have a closed boundary, it is better if the line is actually along the path. When the face is in the corner, like let's say I want to put it here, sometimes it can cause issues, especially if you want to go manually. So for example, if I go here, you're going to see that, okay, it's coming well and it's coming well. But then when it gets here, it won't, it can go a little bit like crazy. So because of that, like my personal preference is always put it like along the pathway of a line perpendicular to that line, okay? So now to show you one last example of follow me, because I truly love follow me, let's say that I want to use follow me to quickly model a bar. I have my profile, I have my path, I'm going to select my path, I'm going to click follow me, I'm going to click on my bar, and voila. Look at this. See? This is why I like follow me. It's a very cool tool. See? So the uses are really like what you can come up with, to be entirely honest. But it is a really cool tool. And the last modification that I want to introduce you today is scaling. And scaling is an interesting one, but to better understand, I want to draw a real object. So let's say that I want to draw a table, right? So this table, I don't want it to be very big of a table. Let's say that the table is going to be 900 millimeters, so 0.9 by, let's say, I want it to be for the length 1.5 meters. Sure, not a very big table. Let's push pull it. The height is going to be, let's say that I know the height in inches, so that's fine. I can just go in here and say, well, the height is going to be 30 inches. Enter. And now it's 30 inches. And now let's give it some legs. So I'm going to come here to the bottom and I'm going to outline my legs. So let's say that the legs, I don't want very big legs. So let's say that they're going to be 0.1 by 0.1, teeny tiny legs. I'm going to select my leg in M for move, pick up, control, make a copy. And I can select both of them, move, pick up, control, make a copy. You can start seeing how I'm mixing all of the things that I've introduced you to create geometry. And then I'm going to finish by using push-pull, because remember, push-pull can modify geometry. And let's say that the height of my table is going to be like, I don't know, 0.70? Yeah, 0.70 for the bottom. All right. So there's my table. Fantastic, great, awesome. Now let's say that the client comes and tells me, oh, Irene, I need this table. I don't want it to be 1.5 meters long. I need it to be 3 meters long because, like I want it to be one of those like really long fancy tables. And I'm like, okay, no problem. I'm going to use the scale command. So I'm going to select my geometry and then I'm going to use the scale command with key X. Now, when you're working with scale, you will know that you are in the scale command because you're going to get these kind of like box surrounding the geometry. And it is always going to be a box, even if your geometry is not box shaped. And the thing is that scaling can do many different things depending on what nodes on this box you activate. So there's 3 types of nodes. There are edge nodes, there are face nodes, and there are corner nodes. So let's see what they do. So let's say that I'm going to start with the face nodes. So that would be, for example, this guy or this guy. These are the ones that are basically like, if you're counting the 6 faces of the box, they are the nodes that are in the center of each of those faces, okay? So you're going to also notice that when you put your cursor over one of those nodes, even if you haven't clicked, the opposite node to that one will become hidden. And the reason for this is because scaling works almost with like a rubber band effect, where you're always going to have a node that you click on and an opposing node that is going to serve as an anchor. So when you scale, you are holding an anchor position and then stretching in the direction of the node that you click on. So if I click on a face node, it's going to, see, it's holding where that node is and it's stretching from where I'm clicking. And that is the keyword. It is stretching. So scaling is also the stretching command, depending on which nodes you click on. So face nodes are going to allow you to stretch the geometry in one direction. See, if I press, let's say, for example, this guy, see, now it can only go in that direction. It can only go in this direction. If you press the control key, it's going to, like with the rectangle command, it's going to flip that anchor from being the opposing node to being the midway or like center of the geometry. So this basically allows you to have a even stretching or even scaling if you want to keep the relative position. If I press control again, it just goes back to being edge to edge, okay? But you can only scale in one axis, one direction. The edge nodes are going to be the ones that you will encounter in the scaling box where 2 faces meet. And this is going to allow you to, once again, stretch, but this time is going to be in 2 directions, the directions of those 2 faces. So see, I can change in red and in green at the same time, or if I click on this edge here, I can change in red and blue at the same time. The same control option applies, like it's all the same once you've selected your node. And then finally, we have the corner nodes, which are going to give us uniform scaling. So this is show scaling, and it's just going to make the whole thing bigger or smaller. Now, this uniform scaling is the default, but if you want to make it not uniform, you are going to hold Shift. And this is basically going to allow you to scale in all 3 directions separate. And you can actually, if you look in the measurement bar at the bottom, you can actually see that it's showing me the different values of, red, green, and blue. But this guy is going to be mostly for uniform scale. Now, one very important thing to pay attention to when you're scaling is what is the unit that we are typing in if we want to scale precisely. Because again, same as with my other drawing and modification commands, I can use an inference point. So I could just like scale this to some inference point or line in my model, or I can type in a value. The question is, what is that value? So in SketchUp, scaling is by default working with order of magnitude. That basically means that when you start with your object, say it even snaps to it, it starts at scale 1. So this is like whatever size it is. So what I can do is I can make something, for example, 2 times bigger. Or if I want to make it 0.5, that is going to be half the size of the object. And the problem here is that we don't really use in design that kind of scaling. We only really use that scaling if we are switching from one unit to another. So, if you're going from metric to imperial or vice versa, it's going to be 2.54 or 0.39, like that. Or if you are doing furniture for children, like you're going to take a regular chair and you're just going to make it a fraction of its size. Normally, when we're scaling things, it's going to be more like the example that I gave you. I made this table to be 1.5 meters long, and the client comes and tells me that they want it to be, I said 3 meters, which I could deduce the order of magnitude, but let's say that it's not a perfectly like 2 times num. So the other way that you can kind of like override that order of magnitude is by making sure that you type in the desired unit. So basically what I can do here is come to my model, start my scaling, and instead of having to do the math of what is the order of magnitude equivalent of 1.5 to 3, I can just type 3. Now, the important thing here is that you need to put the unit, because basically you're telling SketchUp, hey, I want you to stretch this table until it is 3 meters long. If I just type 3 enter, then it's going to be 3 times long. But if I go 3m for meter and I press enter, when I come here to measure my table, it is 3 meters. And once again, the advantage of this method is that you can use it with any unit. So I could also go 3000 mm for millimeters, or I could go, let's say 10 feet. So I'm going to go 10 feet, enter. And there you go. And I can also use inches. So if I want to type inches instead of feet, I can just go 120, hold shift, double apostrophe, enter 120 inches, okay? So this is more the way that we're going to work with scaling as interior designers. You have a table and you want it to be specific dimensions, so you're going to stretch that table until it is those specific dimensions. Now that being said, you have to be very careful with scale, because do you see what happened to my legs? My leg started being 0.1 by 0.1, but now if I measure this leg, it's 0.2. So the problem here is that if I would be sending this table to be built, whoever would get this 3D model would build the table wrong, because I didn't want my legs to be 0.2 for like this dimension here. This is a secondary effect of working with scaling, because scaling is not just stretching the one dimension that I care about, it's stretching the whole geometry. So because of this, I always like to give some basic rules when deciding whether you should be working with scaling or not. So the first rule is you never scale anything that is your design. If you're going to be eventually creating construction documentation for a thing, and that thing needs to change dimensions, there's other ways to change dimensions. You're not going to use scaling, because as soon as you use scaling, there is a chance that you're going to deform something that you didn't want it to deform. So if it's your design, you don't scale. You are going to scale everything else. So for example, let's say you're bringing in a sofa for your proposal, but the sofa is not your sofa. You're not designing the sofa. The sofa is just like a brand sofa or something like that. You can scale that one to make it fit the desired dimensions, because it's not your design. You're not telling somebody, okay, you're going to build a sofa based on what you see on the screen. So anything that is not your design, anything that is contextual. So for example, let's say that you have a room and you're only really doing the furniture of the room, but you need to have doors and windows because, you know, those do affect the design. You can stretch those doors and windows. The other thing to keep in mind is that even those things that are not a part of your design, you can stretch them, but you want to be careful that you don't stretch them to the point that they look cartoonish, that they no longer look real. So for example, if I select this table here and I go and I stretch it like this looks goofy. This no longer looks like a real table. It looks like something weird, right? So you do not want to, I see these very often with windows. They will find like a teeny tiny window and then they will scale it like gigantic. And then it looks really goofy because it doesn't look realistic. So those are the three main things to keep into consideration. You never scale your design. You never scale to the point that things are so deformed that like you can no longer recognize them as real objects. And you can scale context or, you know, supplementary elements to fit whatever your design intent is. And with that, we have reached the end of the modification commands. Now, I'm going to be entirely honest, there's a bunch more. I know, like if you go on the tools menu, you will see that there are more, but I'm going to be introducing you to those other commands as we do more complex stuff. With these drawing and modification commands, you should be able to start like having some fun and building some stuff. So I'm going to stop here for this video. So if you liked it, if you found it helpful, please give it a like. If you have any questions, by all means, just add them in the comments. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining in. Thank you very much for sticking through, and I will see you on the next one. Cheers.